It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. Ha! And this is the Lady Bits episode 2, Feedback Friday. And overall, really good. Really, really good. I'm happy about that. The engagements have been very, very positive. A good, 15% positive engagements, which is really good. So overall, I'm very happy. And I'm not going to get on kind of the nitpicks or sort of isolated opinions or everything like that, because there's always some of that, and people are entitled to their opinion. And just because it's not a majority opinion doesn't mean it's completely dismissed. I do want to tackle one element because, and this is tricky, because this is an instance where I don't agree with the criticism. I do, however, see the criticism as valid. And if that makes sense to you, awesome. I had some people complain about this portion, the lady bit for this episode, and how the language was gendered. And you'll notice that my definition that I offered at the end of the segment is not gendered. My definition of sexism is ideas or behaviors that perpetuate dominance of one gender over other genders. I do not say men over women. I do not say against women. But earlier on, I use pre-existing definitions of various terms that are gendered. And people got mad at me for that. Let me see if I can land on this one. No, this is Amy. Excuse me, Amy. Is this it? Yeah. So you'll notice that the title of the segment was How Sexism Sneaks into Feminist Critiques of Video Games. Now, feminist critiques meaning the focus is going to be on women, step one. So that alone made me kind of surprised that people got upset at me about the framing of this segment. Because it wasn't just a look at sexism, it was how some allegedly feminist critiques of video games are actually quite benevolently sexist. That's what it was about. In this context, yes, it is about women. Now, I moved on to a definition of sexism. Come on, don't fade out. A definition of sexism that I introduced by saying it sucks. And people still got mad at me for it. And I can't do anything about this. This is the dictionary definition. If you Google sexism, if you go to dictionary.com, this is what you get. Prejudice, stereotyping, or discrimination, typically against women on the basis of sex. I cannot change the fact that this is true, okay? I cannot change that this is the established definition of sexism. So getting mad at me isn't going to change that fact. And I'm not trying to make fun of people, because I can understand the confusion, even though I said, some academics say you can't be sexist against men. Yes, you can. There's just an added element of behavioral conditioning for women that men don't receive. And that led to some interesting conversations and comments that I'll get to in a minute. But I want to continue because this actually got me thinking, the part that they talked about hostile sexism and benevolent sexism, the definitions being gendered. And it's interesting because these are the accepted definition. I shrunk them down to be less wordy, but I looked it up, and the online sources do say an antagonistic attitude towards women. Now, the interesting thing about hostile sexism, aka misogyny, actually does have a comparative state for men. Misandry. Now, I am saving that stuff for a later episode. I cannot possibly do it all in one. These are going to layer. But Hostile sexism does have a correlating state for men. This idea, you know, all men are pigs is a misandrous statement. It is an antagonistic attitude towards men. The idea that, oh, wow, you cooked this all on your own? Your wife didn't help? That is depicting men as incompetent in some way, right? That is still under the purview of hostile sexism. That's something that people claim is benevolent sexism, but it's actually not. And one of the key indicators that it's not is that men don't get barred from being chefs because they're men. Okay? It's wouldn't you rather be somewhere else? No. In the culinary world, the majority of chefs are men. Like the Cordon Bleu, 4-star Michelin chefs, they're men predominantly. So we don't have that, oh, people think they're helping. These stereotypes against men are all incredibly hostile. The other one you hear brought up is the idea that men are discriminated against in childcare professions, or if they do not behave in a masculine way, because the idea that men who are sensitive and nurturing are somehow creepy. Again, that is a hostile, antagonistic attitude towards these men. It is not a belief they're helping. You know, you could flip it to say under emotional, but I don't think that's true. I think that the antagonistic attitude towards men is the mistaken belief that the only thing men feel is anger. That may be what many men are trained to show, but that is not the only emotion men feel. And so I don't find the op-eds, and this was the only thing I could find, the only thing I could find with a gender-neutral definition of benevolent sexism was op-eds. Those are not facts. Op-eds, it is opinion and editorial, it is not fact. And so every resource on ambivalent sexism, hostile sexism plus benevolent sexism focuses on women. And so I want to do a bit more on benevolent sexism because, yeah, this is a primer, right? You can't expect people to get it in one. There it is. Benevolent sexism in our current culture, because of the way our current culture came out of male-dominated societies historically, there is no male counterpart to benevolent sexism because the end result is not men being perceived as weak and needing protection from women. And that's the critical thing. Yes, men who display feminine tendencies are depicted as weak. Yes, there have been terrible stereotypes about gay men and, you know, men that act femi or don't act masculine, you know, all this stuff of act like a man. But there is no belief that, oh no, now the women folk must come in and save them. And we'll touch on this a bit more in the next episode because of the lady bit for that episode. But the thing about benevolent sexism is that there is no encouragement in our culture for women to put men up on moral pedestals. You don't get brownie points for saying, isn't my man wonderful? He does list stereotypical behaviors, you know, isn't my man wonderful? He killed a dinosaur with his bare hands, or he killed a woolly mammoth with his bare hands. That kind of backward thinking. There is no stereotypical domestic role for men that defines male behavior the way being a wife and mother as the ideal role for women does. That's why we have all these issues with masculinity being tied to careers and why men get hit so hard when they're out of work, especially for prolonged periods of time, because men are defined by their jobs. And so it's interesting that people attempted to extrapolate this benevolent sexism and for sort of those, isn't that cute statements, you know, oh, you made that yourself, or, you know, this idea that when women look after the kids, it's normal. When men look after the kids, it's babysitting. That, yes, enforces male gender roles. It does. But it is from a hostile perspective. We have to remember that men being seen as incompetent child carers, carers of children, does not make society perceive them as weak. Now, that doesn't mean there haven't been negative impacts against men historically. I mean, may God, if someone's mother died, a lot of men put their kids in orphanages. You know, they had a living parent, but, well, men couldn't raise children on their own. That was just not done. And yes, that happened. But that did not lead to the idea that men are incapable of holding certain, you know, stressful jobs, that women must somehow protect men. And that's the critical thing. I actually said in the show, this is not about the very noble desire to protect your loved ones. This is about the idea that women need protection from men because women are incapable of protecting themselves. Now, some people would say, yes, but women aren't in positions a lot of the times to stand up for themselves. And those are elements of society that need to change. If there is any element of society where men are expected to protect women because women are at somehow in our age of technology and all these mobility aids and, you know, machines, if women are ever in a position that they are at some sort of unique heightened threat, that is, or perceived heightened threat, that is a sexist situation. And the ideal result is not, oh, men folk look after the women folk. The correct result is change the system so that the men folk don't have to bear the extra burden of looking after the women folk, because they won't need to, because the system is equal in terms of opportunity and safety. Now, that's the whole thing that benevolent sexism looks at. And it's interesting, again, that people try to twist the definition to create some sort of false equivalency, instead of understanding that there is something unique in our society regarding the rigid gender roles that, you know, men and women are expected to adhere to, but they are based on the idea of women as the weaker sex. There's no example where men are, you know, seen as weak, but that's okay because they can't help it. And that's the important thing. The idea is men are weak, they're punished until they become stronger. That doesn't happen with women. And that's important to distinguish. So, you know, this is challenging for a lot of people because then go, but disposable male syndrome. Hang on to that. I will deal with that, but that is, again, a form of hostile sexism. And so that's why, that's the entire reason I came up with my own definition of sexism, because I felt like it incorporated both elements of the ambivalent sexism scale. My whole point at the end of this segment was that we don't need hostile sexism and benevolent sexism if we have a definition that encompasses all of it in a neat and clean way. Let's try to get as close to, you know, the elegance of E equals MC squared in terms of theory here, right? So I came up with ideas or behaviors that perpetuate dominance of one gender over other genders. So if people are openly hostile, if there is a sort of a microcosm, like I've seen in some families where there is moral license for every woman in the room to just jump on a guy and shout him down. Well, that is misandry. That is, in a smaller context, women being dominant over men just because of sheer numbers. Now, you know, you're not going to hear women go, oh, that's okay, you just stay there because it's more natural. Get out of my kitchen. You're in my way. And that was the exact example that I said, the idea of women are happier staying home with the kids sounds so much better than women can't work because they're just not capable. But it's essentially the same thing. It's discouraging women from participating in the workforce. The idea of a definition of sexism that is just ideas or behaviors that perpetuate dominance of one gender over other genders mean you don't have to understand the ins and outs of ambivalent sexism theory. It's much simpler. It's something you can test. Does whatever's happening here mean somebody is seen as inherently less than someone else, if on the basis of gender? If so, it is sexist. If not, it's not. And that's why I use that example of Peach in the Mushroom Kingdom. There is nothing in Nintendo lore that says Peach is lesser to Mario or lesser to Bowser. She's the head of state. And we'll get into that more in the Damsel in Distress episode. I didn't want to steal too much away. But, this is why it's so important to talk about these things and climb down from our sensitivities, because I know a lot of guys feel really besieged in these discussions. And then we have the cliche of, what about the men? And it makes it difficult for people to listen sometimes. And I get that. That's not a criticism. That's just human nature. When you feel like no one in the conversation is actually representing your interests, you get defensive and can't listen effectively. But it's telling that we are so far down that rabbit hole. We're so far away from people being able to listen from a calm place that even though I put all these jokes in the show, and, if people had watched the whole show, if people had watched the entire segment and looked at the context from the beginning and then looked where it ended, they'd be able to go, all right, this is a journey from accepted definitions to, my mosaic approach, my approach to mosaic humanities, mosaic feminism, the idea that everybody has a part to play, everybody is a tile on the board, and we all make a beautiful picture together. This is why I'm advocating a mosaic approach to an intersectional approach, because it's the difference between looking back and looking at the whole painting made up of tiny little tiles, as opposed to trying to look at the world through a pinhole. And that's what I think intersectionalism does. And if you hear a strange noise in the background, if you've got really good speakers or headphones, that is Momo snoring. It sounds a bit like angry bees. Yeah, that's Momo snoring. He's dreaming up a storm right now. But I just wanted to spend some time on that because this is an example of criticism of complaints telling me where we need to do a little bit more discussion. And that's awesome. I appreciate the people who left those comments, even if they jump to conclusions and were like, that's a flaw, as opposed to going, well, no, it's not. It's telling a story with a beginning, middle, and end. Like, all right, here's a crappy reductive definition. Here's something that's better. But I think we can avoid all this wordiness and multiple terms and just get something neat and clean that works. And I could be wrong. But I get into a trap here where I want to accurately present the accepted, I won't say science, but the accepted opinion on this issue, the accepted definitions, the accepted scholarship. This is where scholarship is. I need to present that so you guys can actually function in other conversations. You guys need to know where we're at. Just flinging my definition at you based on nothing does no good, because then if you get into a debate with somebody who does come from that sort of Marxist, identitarian, intersectionalist school, they'll get, well, that's not the accepted definition, so says Google, and then you don't really have a leg to stand on. I have to present all of it. And if people are going to get upset when I'm just stating this is where we're at, it's very difficult to have a discussion because you can't lay the framework without somebody trying to blow it up. Now, this is a minority. but I did want to respond to their criticisms because I get why people are jumpy. And I know a lot of people have been, what about this? What about this? What about this? Guys, it's episode 2 out of 12. Every show is going to have some sort of factoid in it, but we can't walk before we run here. We can't get on to more advanced stuff until we actually get the basics down. And what I'm trying to do is not force my opinion on people. I am trying to provide people with information so they can form their own opinions. And I appreciate that one person in the comment that pointed out that my own definition was gender neutral. And it's non-binary on top of that. And I thought I was going to get crap for that. People seized on something else. I been doing a lot of reading lately on how First Nations people, Native Americans, actually had 5 genders. And, we get a little bit of that in Canada through bastardized, two-spirit terminology. Two-spirit is a real thing, but it's misused in the way a lot of people fling it around in Canada trying to seem posh. But, I am giving a nod to, systems that do recognize either a third gender or a third, fourth, and fifth gender, because it's a limit on that. You're never going to hear me advocating for, 42 different gender pronouns. That's not where I'm coming from. I'm looking at belief systems that predate ours and function differently. And I'm all about, you guys may have noticed, whether something is functional or not. Now, I want to touch on one more thing about this idea that my goal is to give people the information to make their own opinions, because I was really taken aback by how, whoa, that's weird the way that artifacted there. That must be the 720p output as opposed to the 4K. Yucky. People jumped all over the Kingdom Hearts reference. The funny thing is about that I would never have thought that reference, that example up on my own. That came from a participant in a feedback session. And I hadn't even thought about Kingdom Hearts because I'm very careful about gender signifiers versus sexism. Just because something is traditional gender signifiers, like Princess Peach, does not make it inherently sexist. But gender signifiers and gender roles are not the same thing. And so I thought that person made a good point. But the fact that it was contentious was kind of the joke. That it's not just about disagreeing. The conversation then didn't go back and forth of, yeah, but this, but that, but the series got better. No, it just goes, no, can't even right now. You are blocked, right? People missed that because they were can't evening right now. Which is very funny, but kind of sad at the same thing. Because it sort of proved my comedic point. And this is the role of comedy. People went here. Kingdom Hearts, boom! They would not listen to what I was saying. To the point that they had to do these mental gymnastics that because Aqua's in a prequel and that's first in Kingdom Hearts chronologically, Aqua is actually an original Kingdom Hearts character, but she's not. Right? She's not. She's got a brief cameo in Kingdom Hearts 2. Then there's all these... I tried to play Kingdom Hearts 23.5 or whatever the hell it was, that DS game, and it was bad. And so I was basically like, I am going to wait for Kingdom Hearts 3, and that's it. I played Kingdom Hearts 1, I played Kingdom Hearts 2, I tried to play the DS games. No, they're not my thing. But I played plenty of Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 to know that no, a reference to Kingdom Hearts is actually, and I did not, this did not come from me. It's completely valid to criticize the depictions, because you've got, Sora and what's his name, Riku, slashing it up, making pouty eyes at each other, and there's Kairi being cute. Like, I don't really know what the purpose of Kairi is. It's a girl who's pink and on an island and does things, and she doesn't really do much. And then, as one person pointed out, when they eventually do give her a Keyblade, it's got flowers on it, which is fine. Kairi is very feminine, and that's her, and that's her character. I wouldn't say that alone is sexist. It's the fact that in that first game, and I was trying to think of the playable Disney characters in those games, and even then, the first game was quite imbalanced. And like I said, I would not have thought that myself. That took somebody in a feedback session to bring that up. And that's why the feedback sessions are such a critical point. They became the critical point of this series, that I dumped a lot of elements out so that I could spend more time on the stuff that people brought to those feedback sessions, because it made me think. Even it challenged some of my assumptions. And this is why we need dialogue. This is why it's so important that we overcome that urge to block somebody, not because they're being verbally abusive, but because they say something we don't like. You learn through a somewhat painful process. Learning is not always fun. And I like learning. So, as much as I appreciate passionate fandoms, every fandom has to be open to people who have a different opinion about the things they like. And I do want to give kudos, so far at least, to the Witcher fandom for being really cool about the deep dive I did on a game. And I'm a big fan of The Witcher 3 myself. I understand why there's a fondness for these characters and the way the stories are told. And I mean, when I played The Witcher 2 and kind of had a reaction like my face in this video, I actually went and did some research and tried to understand, much like I do with Japanese stuff, is there some cultural context? There's historical allegory, and still, I find it really interesting that, and this is typical of any fandom, but people defended the game to the hilt until CD Projekt Red came out and admitted themselves, like, yeah, we didn't know what we were doing at first. And, I think that the fact that they did manage to come up with a character like, the particular depiction of Yennefer of Vengerberg in the third game that they went with, as opposed to what they did in the first two, which was not at all flattering to Yen. I don't know why they were such Yen haters in the first two games. Yen's great. But, the third game really gave her her due. And I wish I'd had time to get into the mystical connection between her and Geralt that kind of strips any sort of consent from their relationship completely. Like this idea of power and consent, and it's a theme of The Witcher. And I wish I had more time to explore it, but it's not that time. Like I said, I just wanted to have a discussion, but I just wanted to thank Witcher fandom for being really cool so far about their reception to this. That's really amazing. So I'll leave it there. Thanks very much. I'm going to try to get episode 3 out before Christmas, like enough time that people can watch it and then go be with their families or watch it over the holiday break, which is going to be a bit of a compacted timeline, but I think I can do it. And Binky's here now. Hi, Binky. So we're going to wrap because Binky tends to turn things off and break things. Okay? Right. Thanks for watching.